if you limit what you want to believe is the threat, then you'll pass every time. But if you want to be intellectually honest, then you really have to open the front door and you have to open the side doors and the back door. And you have to be willing to accept the fact that you probably did a crappy job of putting your network defenses in place.
Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. Today I'm joined by Dr. Gregory Carpenter. Gregory and I got to meet during Hack SpaceCon last year through a good mutual friend, Lynn No, who's been a guest on the show. And so been intending to get him on the podcast, and we finally got it scheduled. But you know how it is, Greg, if you know a lot of people in cybersecurity and you need to get guests for podcasts and stuff, you'll think, oh yeah, I need to have Greg on. And then some time passes, you forget to book them. And then you find, so it's just one of these things. So finally, I'm glad I was able to get with you and get you scheduled. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to get together, Phil. Thanks. Yeah, it's great to have you on. It was a fun chat before we started the podcast. We really haven't had a chance much to talk. We got to speak some at Hack SpaceCon last year, but that's been it. So you've got a very interesting background, and I'm sure the listeners will be very interested in what you have to say. So before we get too far into the episode, if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story, kind of where you got your start up until what you're doing today. Sure. So it started when I was 4 years old. I was already a problem for my mom. I'm a product of New York, and at the time we were living in Danbury, Connecticut. And we went to the Danbury Fair. And at the Danbury Fair, I got a chance to walk around. Of course, I had all of the good stuff, cotton candy, all the rides. And then we ended up in an area where all the animals were. And there was a petting zoo, and it was wonderful. And I felt bad for the animals because they were all locked up. So I started to think about some way to free the animals. Now, I don't know if the lock was not locked or whatever. I mean, I was 4 years old, but I found a piece of metal on the ground and I started poking around. It was one of those, I would say, easily pickable locks. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember it wasn't that long, and I heard it open. It wasn't a pop like the spring of opening up on it, but it opened, and I took it and I took it off and I opened the gate and I said, go, be free, go, go. And my mom turned around and ran over. I remember my mom yelling very loudly at me. What she said, I don't know, because all I heard was Gregory Page Carpenter. And when you hear everything together like that, if you're not, if you haven't shot a president like John Wilkes Booth or Lee Harvey Oswald or something like that, you're in a lot of trouble. So I was in a lot of trouble, and one of the guys who worked at the fair came over. They got the lock and they got all the animals back, and about 6 or 7 goats ran out. So that's kind of how I started back in the day. But then it was a number of years before I even got back into it again. I joined the Army back in '83, and I joined the infantry. I was paratrooper in the infantry. And I remember I was the guy that if something needed to be done, instead of having bolt cutters to cut a bolt, to cut a lock off of a locker or something like that, the guys would say, hey, Greg, can you take this one off for us? We'd like to save the lock. Sure. Okay. So that became my side job in the infantry. I was the guy who took all the locks off and made sure that we could use them later on. Now, I would say it's changed a whole bunch. I've morphed into a completely different person. I still have my lock kit handy. I even have locks that I purchased that I trained that could teach my kids. I want them to be able to have those functional skills. And my life morphed from physical security into digital and RF security. Basically, it was at the needs of the Army. I had been, in the infantry for many years, and the Army came up to me and said, "We want you to go into the medical corps because you have a little bit of a medical background. You were an EMT, and gosh, you had scores that are positive, and most infantry guys don't have positive scores. So we want to send you off to school." So they did, and I ended up with a job working in a medical research facility for the Army, and I did that for a couple of years. And at the same time, I was teaching myself to code. So I did my work during the day, and at the end of the day, I would roll up and do my report as I was doing. Basically, I was mapping genomes for different types of viruses. I started with the Eastern equine encephalitis, it's my virus of choice. And I started to map out and create tools that behave the same way as H1N1, H1N2, H1N3. So I created all these tools that replicated the activities of viruses in the influenza A strain. And the computer I had with me, I created an environment that was basically the anatomy and physiology of human. And in there, I replicated that so it would be eventually be a population of about 35,000 people. The boss came over to me one day and basically he said, "What the heck you doing?" "Well, I'm done with my report. I'm doing this. I figured I'd model this, do some model simulation." He looked at me, rolled his eyes, and walked away. A half hour later, he comes back. He goes, "Hey, Captain, tell this guy what you're doing." So there's some other guy there. I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm doing this model simulation, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "Huh." And he walks away. 2 weeks later, I get a letter from the Army, says, "For the needs of the Army, you've been reclassified into the Intelligence Corps." I'm a medical officer. What are you going to do with me now? I have no future. And about 3 or 4 days later, I got a letter, "For the needs of the Army, you've been reassigned to the National Security Agency." And that was it. And I'm off to NSA. So I spent the next 5 years there doing NSA stuff. Eventually, I was put in charge of special space operations. I ran all types of space security systems and signals intelligence assessments, collection, databases, things like that. But I was completely engaged with the mission of NSA, which was computer exploitation, network exploitation. And once I left there, I became the chief toy maker, or the guy in charge of the teams that created all the tools at Army Cyber Command. And we did the same thing there. We made, computer attack, defense, and exploitation tools. And then after that, I moved over to Army and Counterintelligence, where I ran a counterintelligence office with a couple teams. And we used all those types of tools to catch spies. And that's kind of how I ended up in this business. After I left counterintelligence, I got outed by Snowden, and my whole life is on WikiLeaks now.
Wow.
So, yeah. So at the end of that, we actually, me and a couple of other guys in the business wrote a book. It's called Reverse Deception. People probably have seen it. It's one of the most recognizable book covers. Even if you haven't read it, you've probably seen the book cover. It's got a silhouette of a Cold War spy with a big X through it. And it's a counter exploitation book. It's how to hack hackers and basically get them to expose themselves. But one of the things we did in there was we laid out the criteria for APTs. It was one of the first ones to actually map APTs to a structured evaluation tool set. And then from there, it's been a lot of conferences and a lot of different IT work in and out of the Defense Department and the U.S. government, providing special support to sensitive systems.
Very cool. So have you been able to leverage any of those skills that you picked up, like within corporations and stuff, doing any kind of security assessments or pen tests or anything? Were you able to leverage any of those skills that you learned from your time working for the government?
So, yeah. Funny enough, we have been, I say we, it's me. I have a small team of guys that I work with basically, but I've brought in my mindset of ensuring that when you're doing pen testing, you're not limited to a scope of work, rules of engagement that are extremely limiting, because you really don't live in reality. You're doing the Peter Pan thing. You can go through and you can get your network certified. You can get an ATO because you've done your pen test, and your pen test says that your network is secure, and it'll die the first hour that it's, opened up and running for business just because the pen test was lame. So we we've actually gotten to the point where we like to educate employers, educate network owners on the importance of really deep and integrated pen testing. We like to ensure that anytime you're doing a pen test, you absolutely have to include the social engineering aspect of it, moving people into the environment, into the network, if possible. We had one time where we had someone who had no ID, nothing. I was actually a foreign national, got him accounts on a DoD system because, we had done our homework and we had done the recon, we did the OSINT, we did all of the data collection that we needed to do, and we were able to assess the network and the people involved. Basically, we ended up getting some information from a school that associated that with one of the dads who worked there. And of course, we got the information through the kid's account into the dad, and that allowed us to collect the information we needed to get our person inside. Once inside, he basically told him, he got robbed. So they made him a new ID, gave him new accounts on the system and everything. And he never logged in, because we had to end it there because he was a foreign national. He wasn't allowed to have access to these systems. But it shows that if you limit what you want to believe is the threat, then you'll pass every time. But if you want to be intellectually honest, then you really have to open the front door and you have to open the side doors and the back door. And you have to be willing to accept the fact that you probably did a crappy job of putting your network defenses in place. And most people don't do it on purpose. They do it out of ignorance because they don't look at it as an attacker. They look at it as a defender all the time. And some of the biggest advantages we have as offensive people are when we're building a defense, we look at it from inside and we look at it from outside. And we take different threat models and we evaluate them in different ways. And we say, okay, you know, this works for this. This doesn't work for this. I would do this here. I wouldn't do this here. If I was this actor, I would do it one way or another. And that doesn't always happen on the defensive side. You build your system and you look at the threat model and you say, okay, this is what I'm going to work with. And you build everything from there and you build your pen test around that threat model. And you never really see what the real problems are.
Yeah, so much of that stuff is just kind of gets kind of frustrating sometimes to see the limitations of what people put on pen testing because one time corporate wise when they started doing pen testing things were more full scope, and then as budgets for PCI, and although PCI and some of the compliance stuff was good because it did bring awareness to pen tests because a lot of people didn't know about pen tests before then, but just the limitation of the scopes. And as you mentioned, not using social engineering, not doing physical pen testing. If, real world legit attacker is going to try any method they can to gain a foothold, they're not going to be the limitations. And you see these companies, even if they do a phishing campaign, you can't phish the CEO or his executive assistant, or you can't phish his son or whatever. And they get these lists because I was working for a consulting company and it was a list of at least 10 people that were executives or their kids that you weren't able to phish. And I'm thinking these are some of the prime targets and they're not in the picture.
That's right. We literally spend a lot of time telling corporate to take the gloves off and be honest about what you have and what you built. And I'll throw them under the bus because I enjoy throwing CMS under the bus, the Centers for Medicaid Medicare Services. My job was to pen test all of their systems networks. And we had 2 weeks for engagement. And we spent the first 7 days finding the environment because they would not open up and allow us to test everything. Then we had 3 days to test. And of course, all kinds of things pop up because we were able to convince them that it was more important to allow us the latitude to attack like a real attacker. I don't set up your network and say, well, I'm defended against, the Chinese MSS 63879 unit. And you have a 3-year-old, testing. It doesn't work like that. Some 3-year-olds might be able to test pretty well. I get that, but not like a fully trained Chinese MSS unit. It's not reality. And I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of corporations, I know that several organizations in the government that I used to work with, they're now accepting the fact that they really need to be more considerate about what they're including in a pen test as opposed to how they had done it before because they're consistently getting schwacked. All you have to do is turn on the news and you'll see next huge company. You pick a company, next huge government organization, pick an organization, doesn't matter. Everybody in the S&P 500 has been hit at least once, probably twice, if not three times. And the biggest problem is they can't stop it because they don't know how, because they don't take the time to get the right people in there. Now, we always hear that the I guess the misnomer that we're in cybersecurity. Not really in security, we're in risk mitigation is what we're really in. And that's really all we can do because nothing is secure. No computer's ever been secure. In 45, 50 years now, having computers around, it's not one computer has ever been secure. And 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 I would go to bat and argue that point forever in and out of different jobs. And we have air gapped systems and we have all kinds of things put in place for security and protection. And they're exceedingly complicated. Everything from the encryption down to the physical controls that are in place, the software that runs on it, the hardware, how the hardware is put together. And it's crazy, but we still get into it when we're testing. Now, understanding, network topography and things like that, it helps. Sure, I get that. But there's always a way in, and nothing is ever secure. I'm not saying that like the architecture, is in danger. Don't get me wrong. That's not the case. We do it under very controlled circumstances and we look at different components of it, very controlled and very monitored and managed ways. Mostly, and because of the sensitivity of a system like that, we actually don't do a lot of the testing on the system itself. The live operational system will twin it out and we'll look at accessing it that way, but we'll try to get the physical access to it, to break through those controls. And sometimes those work too. You just never know what's going to work because the number of variables that have to be considered to secure something or to reduce risk to negligible level or zero are too many and they change every day and they change all the time during the day. You're not as alert at 9 p.m. as you were at 4 a.m. when you first came in. So there's a lot of other factors, and that plays down into a lot of physiological functions and aspects of, who you are and then how you interact with the people that are there and how accident prone you are or miscue in typing or whatever it is. There's all types of factors that are never considered when conducting risk mitigation. And I think that we need to be very open and honest about those problems and how they change throughout the day and how they change during the week and on the weekends or at nights or different shifts. Even things like that over holidays, huge differences in the people that are in there and how they run and manage operations sometimes. So I think we have to consider all those factors.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something that's really overlooked because, you don't really hear people usually talking about, this time of day, that these people are going to be less responsive because they're tired, they're going to be sharper in the morning. And a lot of those things aren't taken into consideration when they're testing. It seems like, most cases it's really not thought out that well. The scope's defined, they go and do the testing, but those types of things aren't taken into consideration.
Yeah, those variables are usually left off. So the interesting thing is I'm an epidemiologist. That's what the Army actually sent me to school for. I got my doctorate, and I really like to focus on the human aspect, the human functions, and how they engage and how they interact with machines, computers, both digital and RF. You know, it, People don't realize that even sitting in front of a screen with a 60 megahertz refresh rate has a problem for you in the long term. The frequency that your microphone receives at, the frequency that your keyboard works at, all these things actually affect your functional capabilities during the day and it degrades your ability. Some things enhance or affect your ability in a positive way, but for the most part, If you look at mental health issues within the hacker community specifically and the IT field, you'll see it's above the average for folks in general population. And there's a reason for that. And that's because all of these devices that all the rest of the people aren't around all day, they're emitting electromagnetic waveforms. And that affects people. The interaction, the intersection of these different waveforms in different ways has effects on your body that we haven't fully measured when we don't fully understand. Generally, people like to say that, it's okay, it's no problem, but we don't have hard data on that. Nobody has actually ever studied, the health effects of people that sit in server rooms all day long and specific servers and the placement of the servers and your placement in the room and how you move back and forth. If you have an oscillating fan, what type of light bulb you're using. It wasn't until the mid 70s that we finally figured out that certain types of fluorescent bulbs were actually causing ADHD. We had to get multispectral fluorescent bulbs because the spectrum bulbs themselves actually caused the optic nerve to actually change a little bit on how it received data. And that caused ADHD in kids. Once we figured
Huh.
that out and we put those back into schools, the ADHD rates dropped off from exposure to fluorescent bulbs. Now it's gone up because of foods and other things like that. But, you know, something simple like that, we thought we knew the answer for 25 years. And we had no stinking clue until we tested and we evaluated it. We haven't done that with people in the IT field yet. And we probably are decades behind taking care of folks like that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Some things I hadn't heard of there, but kind of back to some of the assessments and pen testing. What are you seeing as far as like comparing tools in civilian life compared to military? Are there any kind of gaps there that people, if they really want to up their game with pen testing services or doing their pen testing, any kind of tooling that they should consider to kind of improve upon what we typically see in normal consulting?
A great question, actually. Unfortunately, a lot of the tools that we had available in the military won't transfer to the civilian world for open usage. But I like to use a metaphor, basically. You have a baseball bat, and you could have Babe Ruth hold the baseball bat, or you could have me hold the baseball bat. And depending upon what you want done with the baseball and or the bat, the tool is in the hands of the expert. And the experts have the skill to do good, bad, different, and to what level they can do it. And I would always tell people that if you're limited to a certain group of tools that you have to work with, be the best at using those tools, find innovative ways to use them. If you have a limitation in tools, what's stopping you from creating your own tools? What's stopping you from creating the add-ins or building APIs that you need to make those tools do different things and make them do advanced things that maybe nobody else is doing? Be the creative problem solver, be the innovation expert, be the person to solve the problems and create something new that the industry is going to have to go, oh, wait, holy cow, we never thought of that. That's a great idea. Who did that? Phil Wylie did that? No way. But so it is. So I would always tell people, don't let a defined set of tools tell you who you are or what you can do. Unfortunately, I can't share the tools that we used in the DoD, but I can tell you to be inquisitive, be creative. I hate the phrase think outside the box, but think regardless of the box and solve the problem yourself. Look for tools that help you solve problems or be creative in ways that you've never thought possible before. There's answers out there, and a lot of people don't realize how creative they really are and what their capabilities really are because they believe they're limited by what they've been provided to do a job with. And you're not limited by that. You only limit yourself when you do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because it's also one of the things I've been impressed with is what some of the people have been doing with automation around AI using MCPs to chain some tools together. And and seeing what some people are doing with security research. I saw last year at some point someone had took Ghidra and set up an MCP to be able to reverse stuff in a
Mhm.
faster, more automated format. So it's really interesting to see that and seems so valuable, especially considering as security professionals, we're getting less staff to help us do our job. And it's sometimes not the budget to have the tools that we need. So taking that recommendation of yours and creating your own tools is super important. But yeah, really interesting to see the stuff with AI. So what are your thoughts around AI being
Yeah.
used for pen testing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Use it, build your capability, enhance your skills, understand the tools you have, know what you have in your AI capability. And if you can build onto it and make it more flexible to do other things, then by all means, go right ahead. Don't limit yourself there. I still run, you might like this, I still run Windows 95 OS on a box in my basement. And I'm trying different AI tools against it to pull out other vulnerabilities that might have been embedded in Windows 95. And I tell you, it's amazing that I get dozens each week of things that I didn't think were even in the code back in the day. But there's all kinds of stuff in there. I think that you can use the AI tools to enhance pretty much any tool you have, or use it as a basis to create tools yourself to do testing. You can generate code, you can create all kinds of stuff with the AI that's available now, and it's exponentially better than it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So use that opportunity to create for yourself your very own unique toolkit. Be a unique pen tester. Be a unique offensive security person to do things that people never thought were possible. So I would absolutely integrate AI capabilities into all aspects of pen testing. At this point, I would still use, human verification and validation to ensure that the results are exactly right because they still hallucinate, do all kinds of crazy things sometimes. But for the most part, the heavy lifting, brute forcing and things like that, boy, you certainly can leverage those things and they'll find a better way of doing it almost every single time. I remember working on a project 20 years ago now, and we had an AI that was available to us in the DoD, and we were trying to solve a problem, and it was what's considered an NP completeness problem. Basically, there's no algorithm that can solve it. So it's a trial and error type of a answer. And we sat down and they were testing us against the AI tool that we had. And it solved the problem in, I'd say, less than a fraction of a second. And we had barely picked up our pens to even. So AI will be able to assist you. And the speed that AI is evolving now is exponential, and it's expected because we saw this as AI developed over the years in the government. The not ready for prime time software that you've never seen is running extremely well, and what they've developed is still light years ahead of where you are now in the open market. To be very honest, it was doing incredible things 20 years ago. I can only imagine what it can do now. So you use what you have, make it better, and leverage any and all tools. I would caution someone who doesn't want to use any and all tools to do a good pen testing job. I just think that there's so many good things out there that you find what works for you and leverage the advanced and the artificial intelligence that's out there, and you're going to be unstoppable.
Great advice. And kind of earlier in the conversation, you were mentioning threat models, and I think that's one area that gets neglected so much. And I see a lot of times when people are doing threat modeling, it's to one specific application or device and not really overall of their whole environment. So, what's your advice on doing a proper threat model against an organization or a device or so forth?
Yeah. So another great question. So in medicine, medical research, we do threat modeling all the time. You have diseases, you have vectors, right? You have victims. And this is what we did during COVID. It's the same thing, right? We looked at the threat model. We identified the populations, which tools, which people are the most vulnerable, what types of risk mitigation factors can we implement to return a lower residual risk, right? So it's the same thing we do with computers, networks, and things like that. I think that what has to be done has to actually go back very, very basic, back to your operations security assessment, your 5-step operation security planning and evaluation. You have to be able to know what you have, what's critical. Is it the hardware that's critical? Is it software? Is it the data that's on there? What are the critical components? And then look at what those threats are to those components. And don't stop with a one-on-one analysis. We used to assess what we would call the communications conduit. And basically, if in the military, if you create a message that you want to get to a leader, that message is crafted in a way that if it follows the most likely path from this guy to this device to this guy to this other guy in the cabinet to this guy who makes a decision, it gets translated the way you want it to every single time till it gets to that person. And then that person gets the information. It's standard propaganda message, right? In military operations. And that message is received by that guy who makes the decision that you want him to make that benefits your people. That's at the end of the day, that's what you want. So I think that evaluating the communications conduit in threat modeling is extremely important and something that definitely isn't done all the time. People look at and they say, well, the threat to this system, and they look at the system or they look at the information on the system. They don't look at the components because if I have country X that's interested in a widget that is a hardware component, then they're going to do what they have to do to get to that hardware component. If I have country Y that's interested in the blueprints for the widget, that's information in the network in a different location, they're going to defeat what they have to defeat as a hacker to get in, or as a criminal, excuse me, as a criminal to get in to get that information. So in true threat modeling, you have to identify the critical information or the critical components in your system and identify those conduits that get to those components and evaluate them uniquely. Of course, you know, we like to say to matricize everything, put it in a threat matrix, but you can't just, look at one component or one thing in isolation and then run a threat model against it. It doesn't work like that anymore. Threats have become, it was something that we under evaluated and underestimated for a very long time. And we paid the price. Again, you could see a million S&P companies every single day getting hit, and the DoD, the DHS, every federal component gets hit. And you don't always hear about like the state and the state governments that get hit all the time, the hospitals that get hit all the time, the elementary schools that get hit all the time, cemeteries. Cemeteries are one of the biggest background to move data in and around the country that nobody ever follows. Go figure. Who would have thought, right? So we have to really consider what we're protecting and what we have available to protect it, and then implement some type of a reasonable defense that we can expect to get us to a certain point. Because at that point, you're going to have to either up your game, change your defenses, or do something. And that actually brings into something else that I'd like to talk about that people don't always do is change your network. Don't just leave it static. You put it up, you put it together, you got an ATO for it. That's great and wonderful, but change it, make it map differently, change your routing tables. There's all kinds of things that we could be doing that we don't do. We put something up and we say, okay, here it is. That's it. We're done. And we'll patch it, but it's there and that's it. Well, if you take and you move components around or you remap components, you rename things, that helps. And it helps a lot more than we think. I used to run the DoD Honey Grid, which was an effort at the Joint Task Force for Global Net Ops. And we had about 500,000 points of presence for our system that was embedded in the DoD systems. And it was a deception network. And it was a high interaction, low interaction honeypot. It was flexible. We could spontaneously spin up different types of things that, a criminal was looking for. If they come in looking for I don't know, password.xls, right? We immediately have password.xls put together with some good, some bad passwords and websites. We have people. The people will automatically spin up. The whole office would spin up. Their network activity would spin up. We would immediately have validated net traffic, them surfing the net, emails. The whole office would just pop up. And it was incredible to watch hackers come in because they would get lost in there. Our networks would change. They were dynamic. You'd come in, you'd look for them. Now, we wanted them to stay for a long time, of course, because we like to spend time with criminals. So we would change things in a way that they could follow for a while. Like, oh, yeah, I could see what they did. Oh, they have some type of advanced defense, but they're doing this. And they were just they were just following phantoms and ghosts. But we used that time to characterize them, identify who they were, and then build cases against them, things like that. So it did work. And changing things around did work. And it kept them at bay. They wouldn't do anything until they were sure that they understood the network mapping and how everything worked. So they didn't attack. So it's a big plus that nobody ever does.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. I've never heard of anyone doing that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun putting it together, and then had to pass it over to I forget what organization took it over, and then they shut it down. They didn't have any money for it anymore. Typical defense program.
So on the kind of the same topic of the threat modeling, what is a good source? Because I know one of the sources people use is MITRE. So what are some good sources for people to, kind of find the threat actors that may be affecting their environments?
I would, yeah, that's a great question. Again, I would absolutely, I would look to the Department of Defense. They have tremendous records on threat actors, everything and anything you could think of. MITRE is good for it. I get that. Um, but the Department of Defense has a tremendous set of databases. I don't remember the URLs off the top of my head, but between them and uh, not DHS, the Department of Energy, sorry, Department of Energy. Those guys also have tremendous threat information on foreign actors and criminal actors. The FBI at the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force has a tremendous data set on criminal actors that have been attacking corporations, mostly in the defense industrial base, but they have others that cross over just into the private sector, depending upon how prevalent they are and how important it is to the national security mission. Don't go to CISA, don't go to DHS. They're still fighting the fight. They're still the JV of cybersecurity. They don't have things that are tremendously useful yet. But I would say definitely Defense Department and Energy Department, and only because they've been around a long time, they've had a chance to build these longer. Defense Department has many, many more organizations layered into it that focus on threat modeling and sharing that information with the U.S. public. I would say start there.
Very cool. So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share that we didn't cover?
Oh gosh, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I would tell people that you you fight the fight, you go out, you do a good job, and you try to do better every day. And you may feel like that you're losing, and you may feel like that things just fall apart sometimes, and things are just never what you want them to be, and you're never going to be an expert in the field, and the world's against you. Remember that you're an expert on you. You know you better than anybody else, and you know what your limitations are, and you know what your capabilities are. Play to your strong points, work on your weak points. You will become a much better operator by understanding who you are and what you have to offer and being intellectually honest with yourself about that. Don't fill yourself full of hoopla doo because you're lying to yourself. And you'll never achieve. You'll always have a gap. You'll always have imposter syndrome, and you'll never feel like you can accomplish anything. And I would say, be honest with yourself, identify what your strong points are, and apply the effort. Don't get distracted by your phone or by all these other things that are out there to distract you. but exercise critical thinking and creative problem solving.
Great advice. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join me. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to the next time we get to meet in person and chat.
Thanks, Phil. It's been great.
Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you on the next episode. I'll be sharing Greg's socials as well as any other URLs to books and so forth. And please subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.